Welcome to Opera Brownn, where every note tells a story.
Hidden in the shadows of Russian history, there exists an opera so daring, so dangerously prophetic, that it was almost erased forever. Mussorgsky's Khovanshchina is a tale of betrayal, power, and political apocalypse. It was condemned, censored, and feared by those who ruled the land. What is it about this opera that terrified the czars, that shocked audiences, yet whispered truths no one dared speak aloud? The answer lies in a prophecy, dark and relentless, woven into the music itself. Every chorus, every note, every shadow in Khovanshchina carries secrets Russia tried to bury. Forbidden voices, political intrigue, a story so powerful it almost vanished. And if you think you know opera, think again. Because Mussorgsky created more than music. He created a warning. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you will witness the dark story behind one of the most controversial masterpieces in Russian history. Subscribe to Opera Brownn now, and turn on notifications. You will not want to miss a single revelation. Because this opera's dark prophecy is about to unfold, and it is more shocking than you ever imagined.
Imagine an opera so potent, so steeped in the raw, bloody truth of a nation's past, that the state itself trembled. This isn't fiction. This is the story of Khovanshchina, modest Mussorgsky's sprawling, untamed masterpiece. It was a work of art that held up a dark mirror to Russia, reflecting a history of brutal power grabs, religious zealotry, and the crushing weight of an autocratic state. The authorities were not amused. In fact, they were so alarmed by its themes that they sought to control it, to blunt its sharp edges, and to silence its inconvenient truths. For an opera house to even consider staging it, the entire story had to be rewritten, its most dangerous elements carefully pruned away. What made a collection of arias and choruses so threatening? It was the story it dared to tell. Khovanshchina delves into a chaotic and violent chapter of Russian history at the end of the 17th century, a time of immense upheaval just before the rise of Peter the Great. It wasn't a tale of heroic czars or noble courtiers. Instead, it was a chronicle of the messy, violent birth of modern Russia, populated by media group, actors in boyar costumes arguing, Russian Orthodox monks in heated discussion, distressed peasants in old marketplace at stock at distribute equally, feuding princes, fanatical religious schismatics, and a populace caught in the crossfire. Mussorgsky refused to look away from the ugliness. He put the suffering, the confusion, and the terrifying fanaticism of the period right there on stage for all to see. This was a direct challenge to the official, sanitized version of history promoted by the Russian Empire. The state preferred narratives that glorified the czars and presented Russia's journey as a steady, divinely ordained march toward greatness. Mussorgsky's vision was something else entirely. It was a vision of history as a relentless, cyclical tragedy, where one form of oppression is simply replaced by another, and where the common people are always the first to suffer. The censors, ever watchful for sedition, saw this for what it was, a powerful critique not just of the past but of the present. They understood that an opera about the 1680s could feel dangerously relevant to audiences in the 1880s. And so, the battle for Khovanshchina began before a single note was publicly performed. The Imperial Theater's directorate, the gatekeepers of the stage, initially rejected the opera outright. They deemed its portrayal of historical events and, most scandalously, its depiction of the schismatic old believers as completely unacceptable for the public eye. The very idea of showing religious fanatics choosing mass suicide over submission to state power was beyond the pale. This opera wasn't just entertainment, it was a political statement, a historical reckoning that the authorities were determined to suppress. The fight to control its narrative would outlive Mussorgsky himself, becoming as much a part of its story as the music he wrote. To understand Khovanshchina, you must first understand the man who dreamed it into existence, modest Mussorgsky. He was not your typical polished, conservatory-trained composer. Mussorgsky was a raw talent, a former imperial guardsman, and a civil servant who felt a profound, almost spiritual connection to the soul of Russia. He was a key member of a rebellious group of composers known as the Mighty Handful. They were musical nationalists, united by a fiery desire to create a distinctly Russian art, free from the influence of Italian and German opera that dominated the era. They wanted their music to speak with a Russian voice. Mussorgsky was the most radical of them all. He was obsessed with what he called musical truth. He believed that art should not idealize or prettify life but reflect it in all its messy, contradictory and often brutal reality. He found his inspiration not in grand myths but in the lives of ordinary people, in the rhythms of Russian speech, and in the unvarnished chronicles of his country's history. He once declared his artistic creed was to depict the people, for he saw them as the great enduring personality of Russia. This was a revolutionary idea in a society built on autocracy and hierarchy. His commitment to this raw realism set him on a collision course with the establishment. While his contemporaries might write operas about legendary knights or tragic queens, Mussorgsky chose subjects like the guilty, haunted Tsar in Boris Godunov, or the factional chaos of Khovanshchina. He wasn't interested in heroes, he was interested in humanity. He wanted to get under the skin of his characters, to explore their psychological depths, their ambitions, their fears, and their follies. His music mirrored this, rejecting smooth, elegant melodies in favor of jagged, declamatory vocal lines that mimic the natural patterns of spoken Russian. This quest for truth was both his greatest strength and the source of his personal torment. Mussorgsky was a man of immense vision but also one plagued by alcoholism and self-doubt. He poured his entire being into his work, grappling with enormous historical themes while battling his own demons. Khovanshchina was his grandest, most ambitious project, an attempt to capture the soul of a nation at a crossroads. It was a people's musical drama, as he called it, a vast canvas, on which he would paint the eternal Russian struggle between the old and the new, between faith and power, between freedom and tyranny. What made Khovanshchina's story so dangerous? It was its unflinching depiction of a tripartite power struggle, a deadly game played by three competing forces, each convinced of its own righteousness. First, there was Prince Ivan Khovansky, the opera's namesake. He was the embodiment of old feudal Russia, a brutish, arrogant nobleman leading the Streltsy, the Kremlin's palace guard. He dreamed of seizing power for himself, preserving a backward-looking traditionalist world against the tide of change. He represents the violent, anarchic resistance to central authority, a force of pure, self-serving ambition. Then there was Dosifei, the spiritual leader of the Old Believers. These were religious schismatics who had broken from the official Russian Orthodox Church, rejecting its reforms. They saw the new ways as the work of the Antichrist. Dosifei is a figure of immense moral authority and unwavering faith, but his piety is absolute and uncompromising. He leads his followers toward a tragic destiny, believing that self-immolation is the only way to preserve their spiritual purity in a corrupted world. This depiction of religious fanaticism, presented with sympathy and gravitas, was deeply unsettling to the authorities, who demanded total religious conformity. The third and most terrifying force in the opera is the one we never see, the modernizing, westernizing state of the young Tsar Peter. This new power is cold, calculating, and ruthlessly efficient. It is represented not by a character on stage, but by the chilling pronouncements of its agents, and the inexorable march of its new army. This was Mussorgsky's stroke of genius, born of necessity. Censorship forbade portraying the Tsar on stage, so Mussorgsky made his power feel even more immense and terrifying by keeping it invisible. It is a faceless, bureaucratic machine of oppression, one that crushes all opposition, be it the feudal rebellion of Khovansky or the spiritual defiance of Dosifei, with equal indifference. This collision of forces created a portrait of Russia that was anything but stable or glorious. It was a nation tearing itself apart. Mussorgsky showed how political ambition, religious extremism, and state oppression feed off one another, creating a vortex of violence that consumes everyone. The opera argues that these are not separate issues but intertwined aspects of the Russian condition. There are no heroes in this story, only victims and competing forms of tyranny. This was the dangerous truth that Mussorgsky put on stage, that the struggle for Russia's soul was a bloody affair, and that the victory of one power simply meant a new kind of darkness for the people. Mussorgsky's struggle to bring to life was as dramatic as the opera itself. He began work in 1872, meticulously researching the historical period. He delved into ancient chronicles and collected folk songs, determined to infuse every bar of his music with an authentic Russian spirit. He wanted the opera to sound like it had sprung directly from the soil of the motherland. The melodies are often built on the cadences of folk music, and the powerful brooding choruses give voice to the different factions, the thuggish Streltsy, the devout old believers, and the suffering common folk who are caught between them. A significant challenge came from the ever-present state censor. The rules were strict. No member of the Romanov dynasty could be depicted on stage. This meant that the pivotal figure of the era, the young Tsar Peter the Great, could not appear. Lesser composers might have been thwarted by this, but Mussorgsky turned a limitation into a powerful artistic choice. By making the Tsar an unseen force, he amplified his menace. Peter's New World Order doesn't arrive with a grand entrance. It arrives through decrees, through the presence of his merciless troops, and through the chilling sense of an inevitable all-consuming power that operates just beyond the horizon. It becomes a symbol of the modern, impersonal state. However, Mussorgsky's own life began to unravel as he worked on his magnum opus. His alcoholism worsened and his career in the civil service, his only source of stable income, faltered. He worked on the opera in fits and starts, composing vast sections but struggling to orchestrate them. His friends in the mighty handful, particularly Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, grew increasingly concerned. They saw the brilliance in the vocal and piano score he was creating, but they also saw a man who was physically and mentally incapable of completing the monumental task of orchestrating such a complex work. He died in 1881 at the age of just 42, leaving a magnificent, sprawling but ultimately unfinished ruin. He had composed the music and written the libretto, but only 2 numbers were fully orchestrated. The opera existed, but it was in a state that made it unperformable. It was a tragic end for a composer of such singular vision. His greatest statement on Russian history, a work he had poured his soul into for nearly a decade, was left silent, a collection of brilliant fragments waiting for someone to dare to piece them together and give them voice. The opera's fate was now as uncertain as the fate of the characters within it. At the heart of darkness lies a chilling prophecy, delivered by the opera's most complex character, Marfa. She is an old believer, but she is also the former lover of Prince Andrei Khovanshchina, the dissolute son of the main conspirator. Marfa is a mystic, a soothsayer who can see the future, and her visions are filled with blood, fire, and ruin. Through her, Mussorgsky gives voice to the opera's central fatalistic theme, that Russia is trapped in a repeating cycle of violence. Her prophecies are not vague warnings, they are specific and terrible, and they all come true. Marfa's character embodies the opera's deep sense of Russian fatalism. She foretells the downfall of the Khovanshchina clan and her own tragic end, accepting her fate with a sorrowful but resolute calm. Her most famous aria, which means mysterious forces, is a haunting prediction of her own death alongside her lover in a blaze of fire. She is a Cassandra figure, blessed with foresight but powerless to change the grisly outcome. Her prophecy suggests that individual will is meaningless in the face of Russia's immense self-destructive historical forces. The future is already written, and it is written in blood. This theme of cyclical violence was Mussorgsky's most profound and dangerous insight. He saw the events of 1682 not as a unique historical moment, but as a template for future Russian tragedies. The brutal suppression of the Streltsy by Peter the Great's forces would be echoed time and again throughout Russian history. The state, whether led by a czar or a general secretary, would always crush dissent. Religious or ideological purity, when taken to extremes, would lead to self-destruction. The names and faces might change, but the pattern of power, rebellion, and repression would remain the same. The opera's devastating finale is the ultimate fulfillment of this prophecy. As Peter the Great's troops arrive to arrest them, the Old Believers, led by Dosifei and Marfa, retreat to their hermitage. Rather than submit to the New World Order, they lock themselves inside a wooden church and set it ablaze. They choose mass suicide, a final, terrible act of defiance. The stage directions call for the glow of the fire to illuminate the advancing soldiers of the new regime. One form of fanaticism is consumed by fire, only to be replaced by the cold, unyielding power of the state. It is one of the most harrowing endings in all of opera, a prophecy of ash from which a new, but equally fearsome Russia will rise. As the flames begin to consume the Old Believers' wooden sanctuary, the stage is awash in a flickering, ominous glow. The music swells, first with the mournful chant of the faithful, then with the crackling terror of the inferno. Inside, Marfa and Dosifei lead their followers in a final prayer, their voices rising above the roar of the fire. There is no panic, only a solemn acceptance as they choose martyrdom over surrender. Outside, Peter the Great's soldiers encircle the burning church, their silhouettes cold and unmoving against the blaze. The new order stands triumphant, but there is no joy, only the silence of power imposed by force. The opera's score falls away to near silence, broken only by the distant, anguished singing of those inside. This moment, caught between destruction and rebirth, captures the essence of Khovanshchina. The old Russia is destroyed, not by foreign invaders, but by its own internal strife and fanaticism. The new Russia, heralded by Peter's reforms, is born in the ashes of the past, but its future remains uncertain. Through this harrowing tableau, Mussorgsky asks his most difficult question: is this sacrifice an act of hope, or the final proof that history's cycle can never be broken? As the flames fade and the last voices fall silent, the audience is left with a haunting void, a space to reflect on the cost of progress, and on the price of survival in a world ruled by power, faith, and fear. The story of did not end with Mussorgsky's death. His friend, Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, took on the Herculean task of completing and orchestrating the opera so it could finally be performed. But Rimsky-Korsakov was a very different composer. He smoothed out Mussorgsky's rough harmonies, polished his raw vocal lines, and reorchestrated everything in his own lush, colorful style. While his version saved the opera from obscurity and allowed it to enter the repertoire, many felt it betrayed the composer's original intent. It was a tamer, more westernized. Decades later in the Soviet era, another great composer stepped in. Dmitri Shostakovich, who knew a thing or two about state censorship and artistic survival, created his own orchestration in 1959. Shostakovich revered Mussorgsky and sought to restore the opera's original grit and darkness. His version is bleaker, starker, and widely considered to be far closer to Mussorgsky's spirit. The existence of these different versions is a testament to the opera's contested legacy. The debate over how should sound is, in itself, a reflection of the opera's central theme, the unending struggle for Russia's identity. Despite the censorship, the revisions, and the debates, the opera's core message has proven indestructible. It has survived because its themes are tragically timeless. The collision of political strongmen, zealous ideologues, and an oppressive state apparatus is a story that has been replayed across the globe and throughout history. Serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the human cost of political and religious fanaticism. It reminds us that when leaders demand absolute loyalty and when faith becomes a weapon, it is ordinary people who are sacrificed in the flames. Ultimately, is a profound testament to the power of art to outlive fear. The Tsarist regime tried to silence it. Later interpreters tried to reshape it, but the raw, uncomfortable truth that Mussorgsky embedded in his music endures. As the final chorus of Old Believers perishes in fire, we are left with a haunting question that echoes far beyond the 17th century. Has the cycle been broken, or is this just another turn of the wheel? Today, as we watch nations grapple with their own histories of power, faith, and repression, the dark prophecy feels more relevant and more terrifying than ever.
Mussorgsky's Khovanshchina survived censorship, political pressure, and public fear, but its dark prophecy remains. This is more than opera. It is a mirror of a nation, a story of power, betrayal, and warnings that echo even today. Every forbidden chorus, every haunting melody reminds us that the truth cannot be silenced. And the secrets we just revealed are only the beginning. If you want to explore more operas history tried to hide, more composers who dared to challenge power, and more stories that will shock and amaze you, subscribe to Opera Brownn, like this video, and click the bell. Because in the world of opera, the drama is never just on stage. It is in the music, in history, and in the dark prophecies they tried to erase.